what are some of the other trouble spots that you've noticed through your years of working with people at that level? What are, in other words, some of the troubleshooting areas that you focused on? And then if there's anything that I haven't covered that you've covered, no need for me to ask it. So just lead the way. Tell us what else you've noticed that you'd like to draw our audience's attention to.
I think the biggest problem is this. So that's what I call the executive mic drop.
Okay.
A good example is, so have you thought about your value proposition? Do you know what that value proposition is? That, by the way, is not a question you're going to get in an interview. In an interview, it's going to sound like, why should we hire you? Because they don't know, the marketing term of value proposition. The only thing they know is what's in it for me. Tell me, make my decision for me. Tell me why it is in my best interest to spend this money on you. They want you to facilitate their decision with something that makes sense in terms of an ROI. And the term value proposition is just a definition of how do you articulate that what's in it for me to the other stakeholders. That's what the value proposition is. So when I'm working with a member and I say, what's your value proposition? Most commonly, I get an executive mic drop, which is a dissertation of all the experience they had. Well, I've got a proven track record, my experience, my knowledge. I've done this. I've turned around 3 organizations, and it's an all I've done, pointing in back of you. Now, this can get you into a lot of trouble because you don't know how you differentiate against the competition. What if somebody's done it 5 times and you've done it and you're saying 4? So that's not going to help. So I think the biggest problem in people's job search is whether they're in an interview or whether they're talking to their network. Their focus is not on what does that person need to hear in order to make that connection for me or to create buy-in for me with the other stakeholders. But their focus is more on what I want them to know about me, because I've gone through these experiences. I know how hard they were. And then you layer in the next issue, which usually comes along with that, is almost a frustration that you mean to tell me I spent all these years developing up this massive portfolio of experience and accomplishments, and that's not enough to get me the job? And it's almost like I'm just going to say frustration. It can come across a lot of ways depending on the audience, but to really facilitate a decision, which is what you need to do, whether that's a decision that somebody's going to have to introduce you to somebody or a decision that they need to do to make you an offer. You really have to speak to less of the stuff they've done and more of how it benefits them. Now, the reason that this is the biggest problem I've noticed is because it really is symptomatic to the human condition. Meaning, I sit here and I talk about this, and yet if it were me, I would probably default to the same thing without coaching. I mean, now I'm getting coaching for it, of course, but a good example is I used to say, I've been recruiting for 20 years. Well, big deal. Okay. Now I substitute that with I've recruited through 3 recessions, where I can segue that into the knowledge behind that benefits them. So the frustration that happens because you're not being recognized right off the bat, and society and your identity is all wrapped up in that, and that's okay. We're not going to change that. When we work with you at ExecuNet, we're not going to change that fact that that's your identity, because believe it or not, we want you to keep that, because that is actually what makes you good at the job you do for when you get in the job. Problem is we need to take the perspective and shift it around to the stakeholder party in order to actually help you land that job, and B, help you continue to communicate with your network when you meet somebody who may not even understand what you do because they're your neighbor, but they have a brother-in-law that works at Google, or a husband that's a CEO at a particular company, or a brother that has a tech company. I don't even know what he does, but I want to introduce you. Or whether it's a recruiter that did some really intense search and found their needle in a haystack, and you popped up, and now they're going to have a conversation with you, and it's much more specific. So understanding what their hook is, and understanding, being able to get out of your own identity and into what they need to know, is probably the most difficult thing to do, because we are inside of us. It's the same reason doctors don't diagnose themselves. And it's the same reason that I actually got nauseous trying to do my own resume. I thought I was coming down with something. I shut off my computer and I felt better all of a sudden, because it's us.